Alright, let's talk about storyboarding. So, in this class, we're going to be talking about different ways to storyboard your comic or manga project. These are mostly for manga and comic type stuff, of learning how to plan your panels and, well, pretty much just learning how to storyboard in general. A lot of online manga tutorials, they'll give you their way of storyboarding, but there's no really tutorial out there showing you the different ways to storyboard, which there is probably the better ways, and that's the ways most people do it, but we should talk about all of the ways. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the horrible. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so first thing we'll need is some materials. All you need is either like a sketchbook or some just plain copy paper and a pencil or a pen. I prefer pencils just in case, but you can use just a regular cheap pen. The storyboarding process is the cheap process. You're trying out ideas so that if ideas turn bad, you can just roll it up into a little scrunchy paper ball and toss it out. Okay, so now that we have our paper ready, let's talk about the most common way you'll probably see of storyboarding. I know several manga authors that use this kind of method, and it is a pretty effective way. Now, let's just say, for the tutorial's sake, this is your script. You've watched millions of tutorials on how to make scripts, and you have your story pretty well written down. Make that a little bit darker so you can see it better. Alright, so this is your script. You've got your dialogue, your actions, and your scene. You've got the whole scene or chapter, or, you got it all written down. You got the whole book written down in your script. And if you don't have a script, that's fine. Some of the future examples I'll be showing in this class will go through ways to kind of create scripts without actually having a script. Although it is recommended to have your script so that you actually know where you want the story to go. So you have your script, and the first way that you could storyboard is, I like to call it the spread method. And the reason for I call it that is because you're essentially drawing out a double-page spread. You might have like some thumbnails on your script of like really small layouts, or even test pages, just to see like what layouts might work on these pages for this particular, let's just say, this line of dialogue that you want to be turned into a whole page. But now you see, I have this line here. What is that line? Well, that line represents like the opening of the book. This would be what you would call the gutter. This is where the two pages fold in, so that when you're holding it open and looking at it like a book, this is essentially what you're going to see. You want all your surprises, like if you're going to have a surprise, someone's about to pop out at you, or there's something that you don't want quite to be spoiled on, from the viewer's view, you want all your surprises to be right here on this page, so that when you turn it, you kind of go like, oh, what's gonna happen? That's a surprise! But that's just it. So you got these two pages, and essentially, with this method of storyboarding, you'll pretty much be drawing in like full details You'll be kind of going into like sketchy details of what you want everything to look like. You're essentially drawing the page, just smaller size maybe, with less detail, but you're still going pretty in detail so that when you go to the final page to actually ink it and draw it and everything, you know exactly what you're looking to draw. All the characters would be completely fleshed out, maybe not as in full detail as you would have on the final page, but essentially you have the entire dialogue, you know, drawn out, written out. And you can do this with a pencil, a pen. I've seen some creators even use like colored pencils and pens to differentiate between the background and the foreground, and they'll even use colors to identify tones. Like, for example, maybe you want these two characters to be shaded out. They'll take like a pencil or something and just kind of shade them in on the storyboard so that you know when you go to your final page, okay, I want these characters to be toned, or I want them to be drawn in this kind of color, or I want them to be heavily shaded. You'll kind of mark down how you want the shading, where the lighting's coming from. You're going into full detail with this method. You're pretty much essentially drawing the full page, just like a mock-up version. And you'll be drawing both of these pages to see how they go together, so that you know what the viewer is going to see when they open it up. This version of storyboarding is very detailed, and it is essentially the best way. It's just very time-consuming and tedious. Although it is easier to put sheets like this in a binder. You can put this kind of sheet in a binder and a sheet protector, so that if you end up not liking the way it's looking, you can just throw it out. That page isn't going to be missed. That's it. You just go back at it and try, you know, another method of showing that exact same, those pages. And you're going to have your surprise here. So you're going to have, you know, maybe the character's looking surprised so that it gets the reader pumped, like, oh, what are they about to see? So that is the fancy way of storyboarding. And it does help you save time in the long run. But essentially, all your storyboarding and creative process, like of knowing what your pages are going to look like, gets laid down in this stage. So that when you actually get to drawing, most of the technical work has been laid out, but also some of the creative work. And for someone like me, I will get bored with this kind of layout before I even get to the page, especially if I've drawn, you know, this page, and this page, and this page, all before it, and maybe this is following the same layout, or a similar layout, and I wanted to do something a little bit more spicy. Now, I could just throw this whole page out, or I could just storyboard a different way. Alright, for this next method, I've used this one a few times just because I don't like to spend a lot of time with my storyboards. I want to get to actually fleshing out the page and drawing the characters in full detail like they're gonna look in the actual print book. I don't like spending a ton of time and energy on scripts and storyboards because I'm probably just gonna abandon it anyways and do my own thing. So I want to spend as little time as possible storyboarding, but I still want to get the storyboard done so that if I, you know, need to know what's about to happen, you need a storyboard. You need some kind of guide showing you where this chapter or your book's gonna go. Unless you're doing like, you know, one of those, you know, episode by episode kind of things. You might get away with doing it page by page. I know several creators that do page by page. But if you're doing a very serious story or a very long, drawn-out story with a lot of details, you definitely need a storyboard or something showing you where things are going. You could probably get away with just an outline or even just a script. I've done several chapters of my story, Legend of the Erased, with just scripts. I usually type mine out in like novel style, because it expresses things like the smells and the way the scenery feels, and I really try to incorporate that into my work. So for this next method of storyboarding, I just call it like the multi-spread, I guess. The multi-spread. And essentially what I'll do is I'll draw as many smaller rectangles as possible, while still keeping most of the detail intact. The squares don't have to be perfect. This is just to get the page layout. Although you want to get as close to your page size as possible, because if you're drawing in like, if you draw your page like a square for the thumbnail, you're not going to know, how much room you actually have. You might plan a long panel here, and 2 longer panels here, and 3 down here. But in reality, you only have this much room. So you need to get close to your format size. But I'm getting off track. So essentially, I'll just draw a whole bunch of rectangles. I'm still doing the spread thing, because if I'm going to make a print book, I want to know how it's going to look on the pages when people are reading it. If you're doing something like a webtoon, or like a scroll down story, maybe like with a PDF, you probably want to storyboard your story with very long strips. Like you can have, this would essentially be a page, and you would design your panels this way. If you're going to have a surprise, you would have like a big blank area maybe, and then the surprise. That's for the scrolling down, like on webtoons, tapas. It's a whole different world than from print books. And if you can somehow use these storyboards and this layout to create a print book, well, that's a product you can make, and that's a way to make money. So here, we've got 6 spreads. That's essentially 12 pages. And you can just kind of start laying down the things. You're going a little bit detailed with it, but not as detailed as the previous methods. You will have where you want to place your bubbles, and maybe a few like key words from the script, so that you know which sentence from this is being said here. The only downside to this is if you decide you don't like this page, you can either crumble up the entire sheet, or you can just like cut out a small square and just tape it on there. You'd be saving a little bit of paper maybe. Although it does take a little bit of time to just, cut out these little things. As far as like just saving, paper as far as throwing things out, the previous method would probably work better, because if you want to replace a singular page on a 12-page sheet, you're either going to have to find a way to cover this up or throw out the entire storyboard. Which, to be honest, that might be beneficial, because if this singular page isn't working, these pages need to work in tangent with it. So if you have a pretty bad laid out page, you need to look at the ones surrounding it as well, to make sure that they're looking good too and they fit the flow of the story. So this method really shows you, like if you're having too many of the same layout, if you have multiple spreads on one sheet, you can easily catch those kind of problems. Because essentially, you want to have very interesting pages. Maybe not panels like that, unless you're having a dream sequence. But essentially, you want every page to be its own masterpiece. You don't want, pretty much the same exact layout. Although I have seen a lot of, like, comedy, slice of life manga that just follow basic layouts. Because they're just trying to tell a story that maybe doesn't have a lot of impact, and they'll follow layouts like this. And that's fine and all. Your storytelling style, your panel style, all of that is up to you. These are just some, tips and tricks. And this way, you can even, plan the surprise here and know exactly what's about to be shown so that you can see what's going on. And that's pretty much how I do a lot of it. You can go really detailed with the characters. I usually just, draw their basic face shape and, a couple of details so I know which character it is, and I'll show their emotion. And again, I'll show, the bubble shape to show, again, their emotion, what they're feeling, how they're saying something, so that I know exactly how to draw the bubble, and I'll put, keywords so I know which sentence I'm pulling from here. And that is the multi-spread method of doing storyboards. Now let's say you're a very visual thinker. You're like me. You see things on a screen, you see things, images, and you don't quite have a script because writing a script is just tedious, boring, and it's a waste of time. As useful as a script is, imagine you don't have one. All you're working with is a blank piece of paper and images in your head. Imagine you see a hero emerging from smoke. Just jot it down. Just draw it. Just draw the basic energy that you're wanting in this, specific page. With this method, I call it the draw and guess method, because you don't really know what your pages are going to look like until you start drawing them. But maybe you'll have, page 1, page 2 up here, page 3, page 4. I'm writing right to left because I draw in a manga style. So all of my pages are kind of backwards from the way Americans would read it or write it. So with page 1, and you can even use whole sketchbook pages to sketch out these images. But imagine you want a hero to emerge from smoke, and there's a whole crowd of people just looking in shock because, maybe this dude was supposed to be dead, or maybe this dude's the actual villain. Maybe he's just done something absolutely horrendous, and this is the smoke of their village. So they're all looking in shock, and you see his foot, maybe land on a pile of bones, and they crunch. You're just throwing stuff down. You're not paying attention to panels. You're not paying attention to the technical stuff, and maybe you'll have, squares up here with the dialogue, just to show you what dialogue's going on the page. And you just jot the stuff down, so that when you go to draw your actual page, maybe you're going at it from a completely creative standpoint, and you just start drawing it. This guy's emerging from the smoke, there's an entire crowd of people, and they're all shocked, and his foot crunches on the bones. And you just draw it creatively, no restraints, no rules to control this page. That can land you in some trouble though, because that's kind of using the one page at a time method. although you do have an idea of what you want and you have the stuff jotted down, but this is the real page. And if you go ahead and ink all this in and decide later that it doesn't flow with the book, you've got to throw out an actual entire page that may have taken hours to draw. But with this method, you get most of the creativity work in the actual page itself, and that could lend it to an energy of authenticity or of freedom. It can make your work seem really free and like it has a lot of life just breathed into it. Which, if you're storyboarding after storyboarding after storyboarding, it can lose a lot of that light and a lot of that flavor. I use this method a lot, actually. This one, as well as the multi-spread. I use those a lot because a lot of the times I want to get the idea down of what I want things to look like. But I don't want to, or maybe I'm just not feeling storyboarding and everything I storyboard is coming out the exact same. So I'll just start throwing down the images I know I want or feelings I want, and I'll like make a couple of cubes to test out the dialogue. Because remember, we don't have a script, we're working from complete blank here. But we see the images, we feel the images. So we just start throwing down the feelings and the energies and just let our creativity go to work. You know, maybe you can have like a whole like brush pen, the tool that you use to actually draw your pages, and you're just sketching stuff to see if you can get that raw, authentic emotion in it. And seeing what kind of shapes, like maybe we're drawing the villain with the smoke again. And you want to get that energy in it. With this method, you keep a lot of the energy and you're pouring your inner thoughts onto the page before you take the technical work to the actual physical page. The main issue you'll be running into, though, is if the layout doesn't work, you will have to be throwing out the entire page. Unless you take this method and combine it with one of the others. Like maybe, since we're working with 4 pages here, we'll do 2 spreads. And we got the guy emerging from the smoke. And maybe you can have a couple of other, test pages here so that you can test out multiple versions of the same page. Which is always recommended anyways, because you want to get the best layout for your book. You want to get the best possible layout so that when you go back and look at it, you'll be like, yeah, that was a really good layout. That was a really good idea. I'm glad I did that. So this is probably the method I use the most. And it's just kind of like a big pile of sloppy joes. Alright, and for the final method, this one I don't really like. Because there's not a lot of details. It does take a little bit of time. Because essentially, what you're doing is you're storyboarding the entire chapter on basically one sheet. Now with this method, a script is definitely handy because with these size squares, you're not going to be getting any details. But you can easily keep track of how many pages are going into this chapter in case you're on a deadline or there's a page restriction. Essentially, you're drawing all the pages at once. Again, I don't really like this method. I've used it a couple of times when I was in like hurries and stuff. So maybe this is your chapter and I'll jot down some ideas of some panels. I'll just write down page 14. Again, we were going to have the hero with or the villain emerging from the smoke, and we're going to put that on like page 15. That'll be the surprise. But essentially, you're drawing the entire chapter here. So you're basically just getting the panel layouts down. And that's it. If you need some like script and stuff, you could write it like up here above and below the pages. That can end up looking pretty sloppy. But as long as you get the basic ideas down, it works. So like maybe you got a page with just bubbles. Maybe you got one over here with an explosion. And you get to see how the entire story flows together. That's the most beneficial thing, and this is the fastest way to storyboard. It's not as efficient in like being able to toss out a page, because cutting out a small piece of paper to cover this up, that's just tedious. But if you're using a pencil, you can just erase the page and completely redraw it. Because when you're doing storyboards, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up. It's good to mess up. Because then you get to learn and find the best way for you to storyboard. And that's it for my storyboarding class. Show me your storyboards in the project section. And, talk about, you feel free to critique other people's storyboards or show other methods that you've learned. I'd love to see what kind of storyboards you guys come up with as well. That's all I got for you. Good luck on your projects.